Hey guys, welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Happy to be back with you guys doing this video after a few weeks of taking some time off over the holidays. Remember, the purpose of this video is we're going to show you about 8 used firearms that have come into the store, giving you guys about a 3 to 5 minute review of each to give you guys an idea of some different things out there on the market. Remember, the point of this video is strictly to be entertaining and educational. We are not making this video to sell anything. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this now. Alright guys, this video is brought to you by our website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please log on to our site, create an account, and from there you can submit your firearms for an offer request. Now with that offer, you will get a printable offer certificate, which you can take with you to competing gun stores in your area to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell them to us. We do provide you with a shipping label, and we will pay you with either a paper check or ACH direct deposit to make the process as easy for you as possible. So please go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Jumping into this video, we're going to start off with the most common and move through the least common as the video progresses. Now in our number one spot, we have a very interesting firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Nevada. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Keltec SU-16, SU standing for Sports Utility. Now the SU-16 series of rifles, of which they have about 5 different variants, the A, the B, the C, the CA, and the D. All of them have mostly polymer construction except for the the barrel and the bolt carrier group. And they do have some subtle differences between them. The A and the B are typically denoted from having a forward-mounted sight assembly out here at the end of the barrel. And then the C model, they move the sight back here to the rear, sort of like an M16 style mounted onto the gas block. It is a long-stroke gas piston operating system with mostly a polymer construction, as I had said. So your entire receiver assembly, your forward handguard, which doubles as a bipod, and I'll show you that in a minute, is all polymer, which brings this down to about a 5-pound overall weight. You do have interesting storage compartment for 2 magazines. This will use standard the SANAG, M16 and AR15 style magazines as well. Of course, semi-automatic. This particular one has somewhat of a dust cover style of charging handle on it. Really interesting rifle. Now, one of the interesting features about this is its ability to fold. So they have a couple different stock configurations. This one has a push out sort of roll pin, and this will, let's see if I need to, maybe the magazine has to be out. I think it does. Yeah. Magazine will be out. This will collapse and fold, giving you a pretty small package. Now, of course, you do have to roll out that cross pin in order to be able to do this, and a lot of them have a very snug fit, so you do need the use of some sort of tool to help you, but a bullet tip is just fine in most cases to get those out. So really makes an interesting truck gun survival firearm. I do like the fact that it is in 5.56, unlike other things like the Sub 2000, also from Keltec. There are a variety of different survival 22s, but this is an interesting one being in the 5.56. The way it collapses, it's very, very lightweight. Could fit in a larger backpack, could fit under a driver's side seat in a truck or anything like that. So an interesting concept. Now, this is a little bit antiquated technology. These would hit the market in the early 2000s, so they have been out on the market for about 20 years or so, maybe a little bit less. And they are a pretty inexpensive price point. Today on the used market, you can find between about $500 and $700, depending on what they come with, condition, and things like that. So again, they are about the price of an entry-level AR-15, but they are very unique, interesting, fun little rifles. One other thing, I'm not going to put the roll pin back in. One other interesting feature is you can pull these legs out. Little locking wedge on either side. Let's see here. And that folds out into an interesting bipod. So just really, really cool design and system. But anyway, that is the Keltec SU-16. Happy to get that one in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a very interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer and a good friend of mine. This is a Mauser HSC 32 automatic pistol. It has a lot of styrofoam on it. Let's get all that out of the way. From its original importation box from Inner Arms, or imported by Inner Arms with 2 magazines. The Mauser HSC, the story with this would actually begin in 1940. Now, as we had talked about on this channel many times before, Germany was a very pistol-intensive country in the Second World War. Sidearms were often deemed as somewhat of a form or a piece of a uniform. Remember, in the earlier years, Germany was really an occupational force. They had invaded Poland and Belgium and France. Officers were usually known to carry sidearms, which would really stand as an authority symbol more than they were really meant to be combat implements. Domestically, you had manufacture of smaller frame firearms like the Walther PP and PPK. You had the Sauer 38H. Mauser wanted to compete in this market. They had the 1934 model, but that was getting a little bit antiquated, so they wanted to come up with something a little bit more commercially viable, and that was really the market they were looking to satisfy with this, was the commercial market. Now, when it was first introduced, the interesting thing about this is it would fire both in double and single action. It was in 32 automatic. When you were empty, the slide would lock over, you would put in a new fully loaded magazine, and the slide would go back into battery. The original early high polished blued finish, the really nice intricate mechanics of this definitely got the attention of the German military, starting with the Kriegsmarine, which was the Navy, who, right when this would hit the market in 1940, the Kriegsmarine would put it in order for their military service, and this would start around serial number 700,000, again following on to the 1934 model serial number run. Again, it was meant to sort of be a transitional adaptation or modification or modernized variation of their original small frame pistol. So by about 1941, the Army, the Heer, had also wanted to procure these for military service, and they would put in a contract. Those would run through 4 different variations when their production would cease in 1945. Now, the Luftwaffe and the SS would also be issued the HSC, but those would come out of the Heer pistol contract. So those would not get their own separate contracts, all produced by Mauser. Now, in 1945, there would be a short run of about 2 years, 45 to 47, where these would be manufactured and used with French police. This was also true of the Mauser PP pistols as well, and then later the P1 series, the later adapted P38 pistols. And these would actually stay in production after that all the way up until 1977 as commercial exports, which is what this is, which were brought into the country from Mauser primarily by Inner Arms. Now, they would introduce these in 380 or 9mm short as well, but during German occupational services or German usage, they were all in 32 automatic. So they are very, very well made. Just a really interesting firearm. I've always had an interest in these. I own a couple military wartime HSCs in 32, but these commercial 380s are really interesting as well. I don't know if the size is any different. They feel maybe a little bit larger in the 380. Which would make sense, but just a beautiful, interesting, unique firearm. This very iconic sort of web up here from the trigger guard to the bottom of the barrel area. So interesting firearms, and the mechanics of them are interesting as well. On the used market, if we're looking at a wartime HSC, those climb upwards of about $800 in really good condition with their full rig, maybe 2 magazines and holster and all of that, maybe topping off around $900 to $1,000. So still, as far as German military sidearms go, they are somewhat in the middle of the pack, probably on the lower end. Definitely less collectible than a PPK, maybe in there with a Sauer 38H or something like that, or a P38. If we're looking at the post-war commercials, they tend to hover between about $400 and $600, depending on condition and what they come with. So they are really interesting firearms. If you ever get a chance to take a look at them, they're really fun to shoot. A little bit snappy. I've never shot one in 380, but even the 32 is a little snappy. But just a cool, interesting firearm. So happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a very interesting shotgun that comes to us from a local customer. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is the Molot Vepr-12 12-gauge shotgun, built off of the AK or the AKM pattern. Now, this particular one has a 1.5 millimeter RPK style receiver with bulged trunnion, RPK forward hand grips, RPK rear sight. This one has a folding stock, which they had a variation with the fixed tubular stock as well. And these have been coming into the country since about 2003. Now, the story with this would actually begin back with the Sega 12-gauge Izhmash Sega, which had been popular on the market before even the Molot Vepr would come onto the scene. A little bit lighter than this, but is known for its reliability mainly due to its use of the AK, the very reliable, tried and true AK pattern of action. And as far as police and military combat-style shotguns in the United States, those would reign supreme and have a huge following and collectability. Now, production with this would actually begin back in the 1990s with Izhmash, but they would actually move production over to Molot, who would come up with the production variant intended for the Russian military and police markets, which would then hit the market in 2003. Now, these would be intended for the sporting export use in places like the UK and here in the United States, with different barrel options here in the US, a minimum of 18.5 inches for the NFA requirements, but they range up to even long barrel variations like this. They use a detachable magazine, 5, 10, and I believe 15 round configurations. There are drums available for the different AK style patterns. Different copies have been made from China, like the Catamount Fury. So this is undoubtedly a very popular design. And the Molot Vepr would actually be, I guess one of the biggest complaints about it would be its heavier weight, but would probably actually be, in a lot of people's opinions, the most robust, sturdy, and well-built AK pattern 12-gauge shotgun on the market, even being better than the Sega variant. So take that for what you will. Now, these, even though these would come onto the or be on the U.S. market since about 2003, I remember these making a big splash. A ton of these got imported in this configuration, maybe in around 2014, 2015, and for a while they were actually really inexpensive. You could pick these up brand new between about $700, $800, $900, somewhere in that range. But then in 2017, unfortunately, Molot got added to the sanction list so that the Molot rifles and shotguns could not be imported into the United States commercial market. There was a big surplus of these that existed with the importers, but once those dried up, of course, the prices went up as well. So these today climbed up to about between $1,200 and $1,500 respectively, based on the condition and what it comes with and everything like that. Now, the Molot Veprs, they also have a series that are in rifle calibers. I've had a few of those on these weekly used gun videos before. 7.62x39, 7.62x54R, 7.62x51, 6.5 Grendel. Those are steadily climbing in value as well, depending again on what variation it is and the caliber. Those are also between about 12 and 15, and some of these the more match grade variants, which I've had one on here before, are climbing upwards of around the $2,000 range as well. So definitely climbing, again, because they cannot come into the country, and they are known for their very high Russian quality, especially on the AK pattern. So really happy to get this in and share it with you guys. That is the Molot Vepr-12 12-gauge shotgun. Okay, up next is a very interesting rifle, and one that I am personally very fond of. This one comes to us from a viewer in North Carolina, so thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a CZ Bren 805 S1 carbine in 5.56. And the story with this, we can actually go back to the implementation of the VZ58 in Czechoslovakia at the time. Now, that was a 7.62x39, and we've talked on these videos before about how Czechoslovakia, current-day Czech Republic, had always wanted to. They kept with the Warsaw Pact calibers, the 7.62x39 and the 9 Makarov and the 7.62x25, but they had always kind of come up with their own design. So they had come out with the VZ58, which is often confused with the AKM pattern, although it is functionally different but looks similar. No parts are interchangeable, even the mags are not interchangeable. And that would serve as Czechoslovakia's main infantry rifle from 1958 all the way until it was replaced in about 2014. Now, there's a little bit of interesting history there. Through the 50s and 60s, it served well, but by the late 1970s, Czechoslovakia wanted to move into a new military rifle. So they began a new weapons program in the late 70s, and it really started gaining a lot of traction in the early 80s. And this was going to be for a new rifle that was going to follow more of the AK-74 family, going to be in 5.45x39, again, a direction a lot of the other Warsaw Pact countries were taking. Now, by about the late 80s, they had come up with a production rifle which was slated for production by about 1989, but the Cold War would end shortly thereafter. There was, following that in the early 1990s, about 1993, there was a political divide within Czechoslovakia anywhere, where they moved from a schism took place, which became modern-day Czech Republic and Slovakia. The military was drained for resources and funding, so they had to scrap the program altogether, and those new rifles never actually saw mass production and military adoption. So they would stay with the VZ58 through the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, they would revamp in the late 1990s the armament program again, but this time, since the Czech Republic was now part of the NATO alliance, they wanted to go into something that was in 5.56, getting away from the 5.45 by 39 direction that they were headed. And again, they wanted to come up with something a little bit more modern and unique, getting away from the traditional AKM, AK pattern of rifle, again, which was a direction they were heading back in the 1980s. Now, through the 2010s, early 2000s and through the 2010s, they have been developing on the 805 program, which is what turned into this, the original Bren 805, which was fully finished and was ready for military production in 2014, which was when it officially replaced the VZ58 in military service. Now, just 1 year later, they would come out with the 806, or the Bren 2, which was a slightly modified and improved variation on this. But this was the original design that they had landed on, a gas piston system, select fire in the 5.56. It did use proprietary magazines. The American Export S1, the semi-automatic configuration, does use a traditional STeyr magazines, but you can actually remove this magazine well and put in the traditional magazine for the traditional magazine well adapter, I guess you could say, and pop that in there. But a really interesting, very functional rifle. Does have a reciprocating charging handle. A lot of people say that this follows the lines of the Scar family of rifle, so you can obviously see a lot of similarities there. Now, this would hit the U.S. consumer market in about the same time, again, as the S1 carbine with the 16-inch barrel, semi-automatic only, with the Steyr magazine well installed. So this is what was traditionally found and had a release MSRP of about $2,000, but typically you found these between about $1,500 and $1,700 on the market. They made them in all black like this and in FDE. Now, a couple years ago, they did come out with the Bren 2 configuration on the U.S. consumer market, and this would be discontinued from production. Now, they first released a series of pistols in 3 different barrel lengths in 2 calibers, 7.62 by 39 and 5.56. Military configurations were the same way, and they offered, you were able to jump between the calibers, so a really interesting philosophy there. And then shortly thereafter, maybe about a year or two ago, they came out with the carbine. Now, the Bren 2 did not meet the U.S. market with as much enthusiasm as the first generation one, and a lot of people today still prefer the first gen Brens over the second gen. And again, as mentioned, these are unfortunately no longer in production because of the Bren 2s being out on the market. So I personally like these. I like the ergonomics, the stylizing, and everything. These are really gentle shooters, a little bit on the heavy side for what it is, outweighing a standard AR15. I actually have a detailed video looking at the 805 Bren compared to a Colt SOCOM, which is kind of, I guess, your modern M4 configuration, as close as we civilians can get to one. If you're interested in taking a look at that, I'll link it down below. But really cool rifles today on the used market. These are sitting at about, again, $1,500 to $1,700, depending on what they come with and condition and everything. But if you do get a chance to take a look at one of these, I definitely recommend picking one up. Really, really interesting rifles. Again, some of the features, reciprocating charging handle and the weight, it leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of other things on the market. But overall, I still am a huge fan of this design. So anyway, happy to get one of these back in and share it with you guys. That is a CZ Bren 805. Okay, up next is one of my favorite rifles of all time, a very iconic one, and I'm sure many of you recognize. This one comes to us from a local customer. This is a Steyr AUG A3M1 5.56 with the NATO stock, where it uses the standard AR15 style magazines as opposed to the iconic waffle pattern mags. I actually prefer the original. Anything that can be more original is what I prefer, but this is absolutely more utilitarian, as many people with AR15s can actually use these. Now, what we have is the new revised variation of the Steyr AUG. So the original configuration was adopted by the Austrian military in 1978 as the STG-77. Now through the 1970s, of course, you have a lot of countries that are going to an intermediate caliber cartridge, whether it's the 5.56, the 7.62 x 39, the 5.45 x 39, and Austria was no exception to that. These would also be adopted by other similar countries like New Zealand, Australia, and Ireland, where they actually exist in military service around the world today, including and still in Austria. If we get to the U.S. consumer market, through the 1980s, of course, this new space age looking technology was making a big splash, and the U.S. consumer market was very hungry for this to be able to be purchased. So an import version was brought in, known as the A1, and it followed all the same military cues as the original STG-77, except it was not select fire. It used the quick change barrel system, which was made popular in the Die Hard series by Carl. You can see popping in the barrel in the elevator. That was probably single-handedly one of the biggest pop culture references that made people really interested in purchasing one of these. So a import version would come onto the United States market. Now, it would not last very long, and in 1989 would be stopped from importation due to the President Bush Sr. importation ban, or the sporting clause on imported firearms. Now, these would stay out of production in the, or at least stay out of importation into the United States through the early 1990s, and the 1994 assault weapons ban under President Bill Clinton would be no help to bringing those into the country. So these had only been manufactured in the A1 configuration and brought into the country for only a couple years, making the original imported A1s very rare and very expensive, exceeding over $3,000 on the used market today. Now, in the about the mid-1990s, Steyr had wanted to bring back a ban-compliant version, so they imported what was called the USR. It was a featureless rifle, no threaded barrel, no quick change barrel system, but still had a lot of the similar lines, feels, and aesthetic of the original Steyr AUG, and those were very successful in the market until the late 1990s, about 1997, 1998, when Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein wanted to amend the assault weapons ban, including anything over a 10-round capacity, which would also again kill the USR. So that would be the end, or the nail in the coffin, for imported Steyr AUGs from the 80s and the 90s. Now, when the assault weapons ban was sunset in 2004, there was a local company called IMSAR that came out with a copy of the Steyr AUG. There was no parts interchangeability, and they were a lot less expensive, typically around the $1,000 mark or so. And those were very popular. They would scratch the itch for a lot of collectors who wanted a Steyr AUG, who were not able to get one in the late 80s before they stopped coming in, or a USR in the 1990s, and didn't want to pay what was already, even then in the early 2000s, very inflated prices for what those imported variations were going for. Now, those would hit the market, I believe it was about 2005, 2006 SHOT Show is when IMSAR would come out with those. I actually have an IMSAR AUG on one of the previous videos you can go and watch if you want to learn more about that. In about 2007 to 2009, Steyr came up with a USA-based operations where they could start manufacturing the AUG again, now under the revised variation, the A3M1, which is what this is. Now, they come in black, OD green, and flat dark earth. You could get them with a short rail, a long rail, or the tactical pickle, which is what a lot of people like to call it, including myself, which is the integrated 1.5 or 3 power optic with the tack rails on the tops and or the sides and the top. Those with the optic tend to retail new between about $2,200 and $2,400. The railed variation tends to be around $1,700 or $1,800 new. Used, you can probably knock off a few $100, so maybe between about $1,500 and $2,000 for a used one. This one's pretty beat up, and it's in the NATO, which I do find tends to sell a little bit lower. Again, even though more utilitarian, a lot of people who get these want the original mags and the look and the feel. These are excellent rifles, standard 16-inch or the 20-inch barrel. You can get the LMG barrel, and of course it's a quick barrel change to go between those. Short stroke gas piston, really fun rifles. I love these things. I've owned several. I do not own one now. I have a habit of selling some things, but if you are a fan of the Steyr AUG, again at $1,500 to $2,000 or $2,000 plus for a new one, they are a little hefty on the price tag, but they are iconic and always make a great addition to anybody's collection. So there is that, the Steyr AUG A3M1. Okay, up next is a very cool rifle that comes to us from a customer in Arkansas. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Colt Match Target HBAR, HBAR standing for Heavy Barrel, and this is a band era. And I'll explain a little bit about that. I know we just talked about the band era ad nauseum with the Steyr AUG, but this one was caught in that net as well, and I'll explain how. Now, if we look at the U.S. consumer market with the AR-15, it would really start with Colt and the SP-1, which was a consumer variant of the then used M16 and M16A1 adopted by the United States military during the Vietnam War conflict. Now, Colt wanted to sort of expand on its line of commercial offerings. They thought that the civilian military rifle, if you will, would be a good option. There were some notable differences. The SP-1 was more indicative of the early Colt 602 with the slab side lower. They did use the early commercial larger pivot pin and the sear block, and those were Colt's sort of attempts to take their what would be the military M16 that they're offering for the commercial market and show that there is no parts compatibility or they cannot be readily converted. They would largely get away from that in the late 90s and early 2000s with things like the 6920 series and more modern Colt variants of the AR-15. Now, as the SP-1 was a commercial variant of the M16 or the M16A1, in the 1980s when the military would adopt A2, also produced by Colt, they would come out with civilian variations of the A2 as well, like the Sporter II rifles and the government model. And those would stay popular, usually starting off with, original transitional ones would have the A1 upper without the A2 sighting features here in the back. As time would go on through the 80s, you would start seeing the Sporter IIs and things like that coming out with the full A2 configuration like this. Now, by the 1990s, everything that was meant to be the A2 looked like the A2, even down to the government profile barrel if you get the government model, and those are actually becoming more expensive, except for, again, some of the commercial things like the pivot pin, the larger pivot pin up here at the front. Now, in 1994, when the assault weapons ban would go into effect, they would ban certain features of the rifle, things like bayonet lugs, threaded muzzles. They could not have more than a few of the evil features on the rifle. So Colt with theirs would get rid of the bayonet lug, the threaded muzzle. They could keep the pistol grip, and they would come out with sort of this watered down variation that you see here. Now, when it comes to band era AR-15s, even though they do carry a lot of the early features of the AR-15 from Colt, they are a little bit less desirable by collectors. So if you're talking about a band AR-15, whether it's an SP-1 or an A2 variation, a Sporter II or a government model, those tend to start, $1,500 and go up from there. The band era stuff usually tops out around $1,200 with box and really good condition. Typically, you find them $1,000 or less. Now, these are really good sort of platforms to start on if you wanted to take something like this and get an A2 government barrel like a Colt barrel. You could just do a replacement and get rid of all this and have an A2 configuration rifle, but then again, you're looking at spending the part, the $300 or $400 for an original Colt A2 barrel to put in there, thus increasing the price, and then you're kind of upwards of the pre-ban pricing anyway. But still really cool nonetheless. With the heavy barrel, these make really good bench target rifles. But again, for somebody who's a purist and a collector, a little bit less desirable with the featureless aspects up here at the front end. But still an interesting rifle nonetheless, and I'm happy to get in and share it with you guys. So that is the Colt HBAR Match Target. Okay, up next is undoubtedly a very unique firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Georgia. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is an AR57 LLC manufactured AR57. What you effectively have here is a 5.7 by 28 chambered AR-15 that uses FN-PS90 magazines. Very weird. It is a straight blowback, side charging, and you're going to notice that there is a standard 5.56 magazine inserted, but that has actually been hollowed out and serves as a brass catcher because your empty casings eject from the bottom. Now, this is a standard AR-15 lower receiver assembly, and AR-57 or AR-57 LLC sold these as either a completed upper, which you could drop right onto your lower, or they sold them as a completed rifle. Now, brand new, the upper receiver alone was about $750, and the completed rifle was about $1,000 to $1,100. But since then, the pricing on these has exploded since AR57 LLC is no longer in business manufacturing these. So these are made between about 2008 and 2016. And so if you want a 5.7 by 28, the ship has kind of sailed unless you find one on the used market, and not very many were manufactured. Again, standard operating features is the top has been sort of cut off, I guess for lack of a better term. The forward rail assembly up here serves as a forward catch for the magazine, and then you have a rear latching system back here. It's a very interesting design, and it just fits right in. So this was known to many people as sort of the affordable poor man's PS90, but even today on the used market, these are exceeding the prices of PS90s now. So very interesting. Again, as I mentioned, side charge, magazine release here, full rail, it's a kind of a quad rail if you count this portion up here at the front. Not much else to say about it. Now, these did see some limited police use in Venezuela, so there are some pictures on that as well. I don't know if other South American countries use these. That was sort of their limited use there. Even with the raising price of ammunition, the 5.7 by 28 is remaining popular. FN still manufactures the PS90, the 5.7. Ruger just came out with the 57 model. So this was actually something I was not even aware of. I had seen those pictures of Venezuelan police, using these, so I had known that things like this existed, but I didn't know that they had been obtainable here on the U.S. market, and this is the first one that I have actually ever had. So definitely very weird, very unique, and happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. Last but certainly not least is a very classic rifle I'm excited to share with you guys, and this one comes to me from a local customer, the same customer who sold me the HSC, a good friend of mine. This is a Colt Lightning. Now, this would actually hit the market in 1884. If we consider what's happening in U.S. arms development, or at least the U.S. commercial market in the 1880s, there are two very popular lines of firearms that exist. There's Colt's very own single-action armies, and those are, of course, chambered in popular rounds like the 32-20, the 38-40, the 44-40, the 45 Colt. And they have the accompanying rifles, the popular Winchester lever-action series, starting with the 1860 Henry with Benjamin Tyler Henry. He would join forces with Oliver Winchester for the 1866 Yellow Boy model with the King's Patent loading gate. That would go on to the infinitely popular 1873, keeping the same toggle link action. Then they would co-op with John Moses Browning for the 1886 model with the really strong action, go on to the 92-94 series, and 1895 using the Spitzer cartridges. But by the 1880s, the lever action, especially the 1873, is dominating the entire rifle market. Now, Colt largely does not have much competition in this regard. They are dominating the revolver market with the 1873. They did have a lever action, but they had discontinued that, and they thought, okay, we can't really go after Winchester's market with the lever gun. We want to have an accompanying carbine, because this whole concept of having a carbine or a rifle with your sidearm, which Colt had in the 1873, that was a very popular concept at the time. So what can we come out with that's different enough from the lever gun but could capture us some market share that Winchester is basically dominating? So in 1884, they come out with the Colt Lightning. It is a slide action, magazine fed, very, very strong, kind of a side loading gate feature. And actually, other than the slide action, it's very similar in appearance, look, feel, weight, ergonomics to what was popular in the Winchester lever guns. And you can see that they were definitely trying to capture on a little bit of this market, even down to the configurations. And what I mean by that is this is the carbine in the medium frame, has the saddle ring on it, just like Winchester's carbines would. On the short rifle length barrel, you would also be accompanied with a shotgun style buttstock, where on the rifles you would have a crescent, which is again the same sort of formula that they followed on the rifle configuration of the medium action. They would offer this in the same calibers, so the 44-40, the 32-20, and the 38-40. So it was undoubtedly meant to compete directly with the Winchester line, but was different enough to not be copying the Winchester line. I guess if people had thought that they wanted a lever gun, they would go with the Winchester, which everybody already knew that they liked. So maybe people would want to go with a pump action, something a little bit faster, which again comes in with the marketing of the name, the Lightning, kind of showing into how quick this can be operated and how quickly you can put rounds downrange. So it was an interesting and novel idea. Now, a couple years later, in about 1886, 1887, they would come out with two additional frame sizes. They would come out with a small frame, which was like your 22 target rifle, and they would come out with a large frame to compete with things like the 1876, the 4570 style buffalo gun, if you will. So they had their foot in sort of all three genres of the market: your pistol caliber carbine, your small caliber plinking gun, and then your large game hunting. Now, this, unfortunately, much to Colt's chagrin, would not compete well against the lever guns. Their sales would really fall off, and so Colt would actually decide to transition back to where they were dominating, which was in the handgun market, and in 1904, these were discontinued from production. So these only saw production of about 20 or so years, just shy of 20 years. So, again, not much else to say about it. A very classic rifle from that time period that not too many people know about. Again, because the lever Winchesters are typically what dominates the history, the story of the carbine and the rifle genre from that time frame. But anyway, very happy to get this in and share it with you guys. That is a Colt Lightning slide action medium frame rifle in 4440. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when I am posting new content. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave you off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.